Hey guys, so I'm going to make a few videos for you guys that you might want to use when you're doing your quarantine work. We're doing a bunch of short stories, and I'm going to make videos of myself reading them and talking about them a little bit, and going over the questions, and hopefully that will help you as you're trying to get this stuff done and turned in. It is for a grade, so you need to get it done and get it turned in. So I'm here in my basement because this is the quietest room in my house. I've got my coffee. I've got my iPad with the story on it. I've got noisy keys on a metal table. The first thing that we're going to do is an excerpt from a novel. The novel is called Humaweepi, the Warrior Priest. I'm going to read the blurb that's before the story first, and then we'll go into it. Recognized as a Native American writer, Leslie Marmon Silko is of Laguna Mexican and European descent. Her great-grandfather was a trader who became a governor of the Laguna Pueblo where the family lived. Being a descendant of these cultures endows Silko with many themes and voices, but it also suggests that perhaps she feels that she does not belong anywhere. Silko thought that the fact that her family's house was on the edge of the village was significant. It seemed to show that her family was not really part of the community. Silko's stories combine elements of her diverse background. She has long been aware of how stories can bring a community together. Stories can be anything that people tell others, from gossip to tribal beliefs told through ceremonies. The fact that she is recognized as a Native American writer means that through her own storytelling she has found a way to show that she does not belong to a community. In her stories, Silko includes beliefs and thoughts of people who share her Laguna background, but her stories are told as a modern fiction, not as old legends. For example, Humaweepi, the Native American character in the following novel excerpt, wears cowboy boots. This lets you know that the story is somewhat modern. However, Humaweepi also sings to the bear, an ancient Native American symbol of power and life. Humaweepi has been singled out as a future leader. He lives apart from the Pueblo with his uncle because he is being trained to be a warrior priest. However, he does not realize this. What he does know is that he does not really feel like part of the village. Many people feel at times as if they do not really belong anywhere, but they live on the outskirts of a society. But in growing older, individuals can begin to share a culture with others, and the feeling of isolation often disappears. In the following selection, think about how Humaweepi grows into his own history and how he discovers his destiny. Focusing on the selection. As you read, notice how Humaweepi responds to the events in his life. How does the old man assist in Humaweepi's personal growth? What general ideas about growth and change do you think the author wants to convey in the selection? Record your answers in your journal. Well, we're not really doing a journal for our assignments. So this story is about a young man who lives with his uncle, who has been set apart from the rest of the village that he lives in so that he can be trained to be like a ceremonial warrior priest, leader of the community. So he has to have all of this traditional knowledge. And he feels like he doesn't really belong to the community because he doesn't live with the rest of the village. And what he's describing through this story, what I want you guys to pick up on as the theme here, is that he realizes kind of how he fits in as he's going through this. So pay attention to that. He's moving from a space of not fitting in to his community because isn't actually with them, to where he realizes how important his new role as the warrior priest is going to be for his culture and for the people that he lives around. I couldn't do this without coffee. The old man didn't really teach him much. Mostly they just lived. Occasionally, Humaweepi would meet friends his own age who still lived with their families at the pueblo, and they would ask him what he was doing. They seemed disappointed when he told them. "That's nothing," they would say. Our footnote here says that a pueblo is a type of village built by some Native American peoples. So pueblo means town. Once this had made Humaweepi sad, and his uncle noticed. "Oh," he said when Humaweepi told him, "that shows you how little they know." They returned to the pueblo for the ceremonials and special days. His uncle stayed in the kiva with the other priests, and Humaweepi usually stayed with the clan members because his mother and father had been very old when he was born, and now they were gone. So the footnote here, kiva, a structure used for religious and other purposes. That would be like a town hall or a church, where the old dudes who were in charge kind of get together. Sometimes during these days, when the pueblo was full of the activity and excitement of the dances, or the fiesta when the Christians paraded out of the pueblo church carrying the saint, Humaweepi would wonder why he was living out in the hills with the old man. When he was 12, he thought he had it all figured out. The old man just wanted someone to live with him and to help him with the goat and to chop wood and to carry water. But it was peaceful in this place, and Humaweepi discovered that after all these years of sitting beside his uncle in the evenings, he knew the songs and the chants for all the seasons, and he was beginning to learn the prayers for the trees and the plants and animals. "Oh," Humaweepi said to himself, "I have been learning all this time, and I didn't even know it." Once the old man told Humaweepi to prepare for a long trip. "Overnight?" The old man nodded. So Humaweepi got out a white cotton sack and started filling it with jerked venison, peaky bread, and dried apples. But the old man shook his head sternly. It was late June then, so Humaweepi didn't bother to bring the blankets. He had learned to sleep on the ground like the old man did. So we have definitions of what their food items are. Dried deer meat, crisp flat bread made from cornmeal, so, traveling food. I also want you guys to notice, right here, Humaweepi says at the top of page 101, he realizes that he's been learning all this time, even though the first sentence of the story was the old man didn't teach him much. But as he grows older, he's realizing that he's been learning all kinds of things from the old man. "Human beings are special," his uncle had told him once, "which means they can do anything. They can sleep on the ground like the doe and fawn." And so Humaweepi had learned how to find the places in the scrub oak thickets where the deer had slept, where the dry oak leaves were arranged into nests. This is where he and his uncle slept, even in the autumn when the nights were cold and Humaweepi could hear the leaves snap in the middle of the night and drift to the ground. Sometimes they carried food from home, but often they went without food or blankets. When Humaweepi asked him what they would eat, the old man waved his hand at the sky and the earth around him. "I am a human being, Humaweepi," he said. "I eat anything." On these trips they had gathered grass roots and washed them in the little sandstone basins made by the wind to catch rainwater. The roots had a rich, mealy taste. Then they left the desert below and climbed into the mesa country, and the old man had led Humaweepi into green leafy vines, hanging from crevasses in the face of the sandstone cliffs. "Wild grapes," he said, as he dropped some tiny dark purple berries into Humaweepi's open palms. And in the high mountains, where the wild iris roots and the bulbs from wild turnips which grew among the lacy ferns and green grass beside the mountain streams. They had gone out like this in each season, summer and fall, and finally spring and winter. "Winter isn't easy," the old man had said. "All the animals are hungry, not just you." So this time when his uncle shook his head at the food, Humaweepi When you notice the cuts in the story, it's because I screwed up on the pronunciation and started laughing and had to cut a bit out. So this time, when his uncle shook his head at the food, Humaweepi left it behind, as he had many times before. His uncle took the special leather pouch off the nail on the wall, and Humaweepi pulled his own buckskin bundle out from under his mattress. Inside he had a few objects of his own: a dried blossom, fragile and yellow, a smooth pink quartz crystal in the shape of a star, tiny turquoise beads the color of a summer sky, and a black obsidian arrowhead, shiny and sharp. Obsidian, the footnote says, is hard volcanic glass. It's brittle and sharp and colored black. They each had special meaning to him, and the old man had instructed him to assemble these things with special meaning. Some day maybe you will derive strength from these things. That's what the old man had said. They walked west toward the distant blue images of the mountain peaks. The water in the Rio Grande was still cold. Humaweepi was aware of the dampness on his feet. When he got back from his journey, he decided he would make sandals for himself, because it took hours for his boots to dry out again. His uncle wore old sandals woven from twisted yucca fiber, and they dried out almost immediately. Yucca fiber is thread-like parts of the yucca plant, so it's like natural cord that he would make sandals out of. The old man didn't approve of boots and shoes. Bad for you, he said. In the winter he wore buckskin moccasins, and in the warm months these yucca sandals. They walked all day, steadily, stopping occasionally when the old man found a flower or herb or stone that he wanted Humaweepi to see. And it seemed to Humaweepi that he had learned the names of everything, and he said so to his uncle. The old man frowned and poked at a small blue flower with his walking stick. "That's what a priest must know," he said, and walked rapidly then, pointing at stones and shrubs. "How old are you?" he demanded. 19, Humaweepi answered. Earlier in the story he was 12. Now he's 19, so this is taking place over a long period of time. "All your life," he said, "every day I have been teaching you." After that they walked along in silence, and Humaweepi began to feel anxious. All of a sudden he knew that something was going to happen on this journey. That night they reached the white sandstone cliffs at the foot of the mountain foothills. At the base of these cliffs were shallow overhangs with sandy floors. They slept in the sand under the rock overhang. In the night Humaweepi woke up to the call of a young owl. The sky was bright with stars and a half moon. The smell of the night air made him shiver, and he buried himself more deeply in the cliff sand. In the morning they gathered tumbleweed sprouts that were succulent and tender. Succulent means juicy, so they were good to eat. As they climbed the cliffs, there were wild grapevines, and under the fallen leaves around the vine roots, the old man uncovered dried grapes, shrunken into tiny sweet raisins. By noon they had reached the first of the mountain streams. They washed and drank water and rested. The old man frowned and pointed at Humaweepi's boots. "Take them off," he told Humaweepi. "Leave them here until we come back." So Humaweepi pulled off his cowboy boots and put them under a lichen-covered boulder near a big oak tree where he could find them. Then Humaweepi relaxed, feeling the coolness of air on his bare feet. He watched his uncle dozing in the sun with his back against a big pine. The old man's hair had been white and long ever since Humaweepi could remember, but the old face was changing, and Humaweepi could see the weariness there, a weariness not from their little journey, but from a much longer time in this world. Someday he will die, Humaweepi was thinking. He will be gone, and I will be by myself. I will have to do the things he did. I will have to take care of things. See, those last two sentences are pretty important for Humaweepi's having another realization there, that he's being trained to do the things that his uncle is doing now. And he's the one who's realizing that he's got the ability now, because he's been raised by his uncle, to take on this responsibility. Humaweepi had never seen the lake before. It appeared suddenly as they reached the top of a hill covered with aspen trees. Humaweepi looked at his uncle and was going to ask him about the lake, but the old man was singing and feeding corn pollen from his leather pouch to the mountain winds. Humaweepi stared at the lake and listened to the songs. The songs were snowstorms, with sounds as soft and cold as snowflakes. The songs were spring rain and wild ducks returning. Humaweepi could hear this. He could hear his uncle's voice become the night wind, high-pitched and whining in the trees. Time was lost, and there was only the space, the depth, the distance of the lake surrounded by the mountain peaks. When Humaweepi looked up from the lake, he noticed that the sun had moved down into the western part of the sky. He looked around to find his uncle. The old man was below him, kneeling on the edge of the lake, touching a big gray boulder and singing softly. Humaweepi made his way down the narrow rocky trail to the edge of the lake. The water was crystal and clear, like air. Humaweepi could see the golden rainbow colors of the trout that lived there. Finally, the old man motioned for Humaweepi to come to him. He pointed at the gray boulder that lay half in the lake and half on the shore. It was then that Humaweepi saw what it was, the bear, magic creature of the mountains, powerful ally to men. Humaweepi unrolled his buckskin bundle and picked up the tiny beads, sky blue, turquoise, and coral that was dark red. Coral here is defined as shell-like substance formed from the skeletons of tiny sea animals used in jewelry. He sang the bear song and stepped into the icy clear water to lay the beads on the bear's head, gray granite rock resting above the lake facing west. Bear, resting in the mountains, sleeping by the lake. Bear, I come to you, a man, to ask you. Stand beside us in our battles. Walk with us in peace. Bear, I ask you for your power. I am the warrior priest. I ask you for your power. I am the warrior priest. It wasn't until he had finished singing the song that Humaweepi realized what the words said. He turned his head toward the old man. He smiled at Humaweepi and nodded his head. Humaweepi nodded back. Humaweepi and his friend were silent for a long time. Finally, Humaweepi said, I'll tell you what my uncle told me one winter before he left. We took a trip to the mountain. It was early January, but the sun was warm, and down here the snow was gone. We left early in the morning when the sky in the east was dark gray and the brightest star was still shining low in the western sky. I remember he didn't wear his ceremonial moccasins. He wore his old yucca sandals. I asked him about that. He said, Oh, you know, the badger and the squirrel. Same shoes, summer and winter. But I think he was making that up, because when we got to the sandstone cliffs, he buried his sandals in the sandy bottom of the cave where we slept, and after that he walked on bare feet, up the cliff and along the mountain trail. There was snow on the shady side of the trees and the big rocks, but the path we followed was in the sun, and it was dry. I could hear melting snow, the icy water trickling down into the little streams, and the little streams flowing into the big stream in the canyon where the yellow bee flowers grow all summer. The sun felt warm on my body, touching me, but my breath still made steam in the cold mountain air. Aren't your feet cold? I asked him. He stopped and looked at me for a long time, then shook his head. Look at these old feet, he said. Do you see any corns or bunions? I shook my head. That's right, he said. My feet are beautiful. No one has feet like these, especially you people who wear shoes and boots. He walked on ahead before he said anything else. We'll stop real quick to look at the footnotes. Corns are thick and hard growths on the toes, and bunions are inflamed swellings on the big toes. In other words, his feet are in really good shape. You've seen babies, haven't you? He asked. I nodded, but I was wondering what this had to do with the old man's feet. Well, you've noticed when their grandmothers and their mothers always worried about keeping the feet warm. But you have watched the babies? Do they care? No, the old man said triumphantly. They do not care. They play outside on a cold winter day. No shoes, no jacket, because they aren't cold. He hiked on, moving rapidly, excited by his own words. Then he stopped at the stream. But human beings are what they are. It's not long before they are taught to be cold and cry for their shoes. The old man started digging around the edge of a stream, using a crooked, dry branch to poke through the melting snow. "Here," he said as he gave me a fat, round root. "Try this." I squatted at the edge of the rushing, swirling water, full of mountain dirt, churning, swelling, and rolling, rich and brown and muddy with ice pieces flashing in the sun. I held the root motionless under the force of the stream water. The ice coldness of the water felt pure and clear as the ice that clung to the rocks in the midstream. When I pulled my hand back, it was stiff. I shook it and the root and lifted them high toward the sky. The old man laughed, and his mouth was full of the milky fibers of the root. He walked up the hill, away from the sound of the muddy stream surging through the snowbanks. At the top of the hill there was a grove of big aspens, or big trees. It was colder, and the snow hadn't melted much. "Your feet," I said to him. "They'll freeze." The snow was up to my ankles now. He was sitting on a fallen aspen, with his feet stretched out in front of him and his eyes half closed, facing into the sun. "Does the wolf freeze his feet?" the old man asked me. I shook my head. "Well then," he said. "But you aren't a wolf," I started to say. The old man's eyes opened wide, and he looked at me narrowly, sharply, squinting and shining. He then gave a long, wailing wolf cry with his head raised toward the winter sky. It was all white, pale white, the sky, the aspens bare white, smooth and white as the snow frozen on the ground. The wolf cry echoed off into the Rocky Mountain slopes around us. In the distance, I thought I heard a wailing answer. And that's it. So, not a whole lot of plot there because it's just part of the novel. But we are looking at how Humaweepi grows and changes, or how he's describing his own growth and change in the part of the novel that we have. So let's look at the critical thinking questions that we have here on page 106. What do you think that Leslie Marmon Silko, the author, is saying about how growth and change came to Humaweepi? So how is the author describing Humaweepi's growth? What roundabout way is she using to explain the ways in which he grew, he matured, became more of a grown man? Oh, that's the neighbor's dog. Number 2. What is there in Silko's life experience that might have led her to write about these ideas? So, all we know about her life experience is what was back on the first page of this excerpt. So, go back to the top and read that, look through that, or skip to the beginning of this video and listen to that again. And then you can come back and kind of compare that to what's in the excerpt. And then you can answer this question. What do we know from her life, from the first page of this, that might have inspired something in this story? Number 3, how do Humaweepi's experiences of change in his life compare with the events that have been most important in shaping your own life? Explain the similarities and differences. So, Humaweepi is talking about how he learned things from his uncle, who he lived with, and didn't even realize that he was learning things. They just, through living his life, through helping him out, he learned about how to be the warrior priest. How is that similar to anything you have learned from anybody in your life? Is there somebody in your life who has been teaching you things? Have you ever offered to help your grandmother bake cookies? That kind of thing. Where it wasn't, I'm going to sit down and formally teach you this, and yet you learned something. Writing your response to Humaweepi the warrior priest, that's the next section. We're not doing a journal assignment, so skip that. Going back into the text, author's craft. So I'll read the blurb here, how it describes theme. The central message about life that a writer conveys is called the theme of the writing. The theme involves some insight about human values or beliefs. A long, complex work like a novel may express several broad ideas about human life and have several themes. In some pieces of writing, the author states the theme directly. In a fable, for example, the theme is often summarized as a moral. More often, however, the author reveals the theme indirectly, that is, through the title, the setting, the characters, and their words and actions, and the working out of the plot. The writer expects the reader to figure out the theme from these clues. However, I have been telling you the whole time that the theme is Humaweepi growing and changing without realizing it. So then they say, with a partner, review the selection, blah, blah, blah. You obviously can't have a partner because we're social distancing. God love us. So I'm just going to read the questions, and you can do your best, and we'll move on. What theme does Silko develop in this novel excerpt? Well, we talked about that, so describe it as best as you can. What scenes or events most clearly reveal the theme? So go back and find some parts in the story that reveal the theme, where we can point out, oh, this is an example of a place where he was growing. This is an example where he's realizing that he's learned something. Go back and find those. Number 3, how does the author's theme compare with your own attitudes about change, learning, and human growth? So, Humaweepi comes into this idea that he's going to be the warrior priest and realizes that he's been learning from his uncle this whole time. Do you agree with that or not? Does that sound like the ideal way that you have for yourself to grow and develop as a person? Or do you think that you'd like to do it another way? Tell me. And that's it, guys. So this first part, we have a due date on here of Wednesday, April 15th. Oh no, I'm sorry. This one is due Monday, April 20th. We want you to read this or listen to me read it and then answer those questions from the end. You can do it here in OneNote. You can... That's probably the easiest way to do it. There's going to be another video explaining how to copy the questions into OneNote and answer them more easily. That's still developing. Mr. C and I are sort of building this as we go. Best to do it in OneNote. If you don't have a computer at home or internet, hopefully you've been able to watch this on your phone, because it's going to be on YouTube, and you can write out the answers to the questions on a piece of paper. You can take a picture of it and email it to me or Mr. C, because you can get Outlook on your phone, sign into your student email address, and then do it that way. There are 100 ways that you can get this turned into us. It doesn't have to be difficult. That's it. Next time, I'll do the next story.